Manipulation rarely looks like manipulation while it's happening. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like control in the moment. It feels like guilt, like confusion, like somehow always being the one who's wrong, even when you know, somewhere underneath, that something isn't right. Nietzsche spent his life studying the hidden mechanisms of power, how people bend others without ever raising a hand or a voice. Manipulation, to him, was simply power wearing a disguise. Today, we're breaking down 5 signs someone is emotionally manipulating you through Nietzsche's lens on power, guilt, and control. Stay until the end. Sign number 4 is the one that keeps people trapped the longest. If reflections like this speak to you, consider subscribing. New philosophical breakdowns every week. You constantly feel guilty without knowing exactly why. Notice the pattern. After spending time with certain people, you feel a low, persistent guilt. But if someone asked you to explain exactly what you did wrong, you couldn't answer clearly. Nietzsche believed guilt could be manufactured, not just earned. He argued that those who cannot control others through strength often learn to control them through conscience instead, quietly attaching shame to ordinary, reasonable behavior until the other person begins policing themselves. A manipulator doesn't need to punish you directly. If they can make you feel guilty for existing outside their expectations, you'll do the restricting yourself. Your reality gets rewritten in small pieces. Watch for moments where your memory of an event and their retelling of it don't match. And somehow, over time, you start doubting your own version. That's not what happened. You're remembering it wrong. I never said that. This pattern, often called gaslighting, works by slowly eroding your trust in your own perception. Nietzsche warned that truth itself can be weaponized, that certainty, once undermined repeatedly, leaves a person more willing to accept someone else's version of reality simply because their own feels unstable. If you find yourself constantly second-guessing what you clearly remember, that self-doubt is not a coincidence. It's often the intended result. Affection is used as a reward, not a constant. Notice whether warmth toward you seems to rise and fall, depending on your compliance. Are you met with closeness when you agree, and coldness or withdrawal the moment you don't? Nietzsche's distinction between power, freely given, and power, extracted through dependence applies directly here. A manipulator often turns affection into currency, something dispensed conditionally to reinforce behavior they want repeated. Real affection doesn't fluctuate based on obedience. If warmth toward you feels like something you have to keep earning, you're not in a relationship. You're in a system of behavioral control. They position themselves as the only one who understands you. This is the sign that keeps people trapped. B. Longest because it disguises itself as intimacy rather than control. No one else gets you like I do. Your family doesn't understand you the way I do. You'd be lost without me. Nietzsche recognized isolation as one of the oldest instruments of power. Because a person cut off from outside perspective has no comparison point, and no comparison point means no way to recognize the manipulation for what it is. The more isolated you become from other honest voices, the more total the manipulator's version of reality becomes. This sign rarely feels like danger. It usually feels like closeness, which is exactly what makes it so. Effective. Conflict always ends with you apologizing. Even when you didn't start it. Pay attention to the outcome of arguments, not just the content. Regardless of who raised the issue or who was actually in the wrong. Do disagreements consistently end with you saying sorry? Nietzsche believed that skillful manipulators rarely win arguments through logic. They win by exhausting the other person's resistance, prolonging conflict until surrender feels easier than continuing to hold your position. If you notice, you're the one who almost always ends up apologizing. Regardless of the facts, the pattern itself is the evidence. The outcome has been engineered, not earned. Nietzsche didn't believe manipulation always came from calculated cruelty. Often, it comes from people who have learned, consciously or not, that control is easier to obtain through guilt and dependency than through honesty and equality. That doesn't make the impact any less real. Manipulation doesn't need malicious intent to cause damage. It only needs repetition, and a person willing to keep absorbing it without naming what's happening. Naming the pattern is where your power returns. Once you can see it clearly, it stops operating in the dark, and it stops working on you the way it used to. If any of these 5 signs felt familiar, that recognition is where change begins. Tell me in the comments, which sign did you notice first? Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.